Today is the 20th of January, 2012. We're at the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. My name is Wayne Clarke. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and date and place of birth, please?
Right. My name is Richard Dennis Weiss. My date of birth is the 8th of May, 1947. I was born in Long Branch, New Jersey.
Did you attend school in New Jersey?
No, I left New Jersey when I was 5 years old. Moved to Ballston Spa on Old Post Road in Ballston Spa, and attended high school, grade school and high school in Ballston Spa, with my final year, senior year of high school in Frankfurt, Germany.
And what year did you graduate?
1966.
And when you graduated, what happened next at that point?
I came back to the United States from Germany, spent the summer having a good time, and worked in a local gas station that's still in existence right on Route 9 and Old Post Road, and then got a draft notice to report for service on the 21st of September. I met with the Army recruiter. He had that delayed. I was accepted into the Army Flight School program, warrant officer, rotary wing helicopter, rotary wing flying, and then actually left from Albany on the 28th of November of 1966, went to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
And what was your basic training like at Fort Polk?
Well, I assumed it was going to be a nice warm environment. You know, I figured Louisiana in the wintertime, I'm going to be there December and January, part of February. And I said, well, I'll be in the south, so it won't be so bad. I won't be crawling around in the snow and the mud and things at Fort Dix. It actually turned out to be the coldest time of my life. It was just one of those things where it was 35 degrees during the day and 31 degrees at night with 100% humidity and no heat in the barracks because they were concerned about spinal meningitis, so they wanted all the windows open. And we literally were camping out for about 8 weeks and living pretty much what you might say outside. So very, very cold and damp, and I would have thought that perhaps Fort Dix would have been more fun.
Well, once you graduated from basic training, whereabouts did you go next?
We went to Fort Walters, Texas. It's a little town called Mineral Wells, Texas. It's about 40 miles west of Fort Worth. And about 20% of my basic training class were warrant officer, what we call warrant officer candidates. And they consolidated us all, put us on buses, and about altogether from all the different units around Fort Polk, we put about 150 guys in a bus and went to Fort Walters. That was the 5th of March of 1967. I remember it very well. Yes.
How did that compare to basic training?
I thought basic training was tough, and it was physically, but I would say that the mental aspects of warrant officer candidate school was much more difficult. We were considered a little brighter than the average bear, and they expected us to perform mentally, academics, and to think through problems, to take charge, to be leaders, and you know, for a 20-year-old guy, that's a 19, 20-year-old guy, most of us were at that point, that was all new. And it was the learning curve was very, very steep, so very hard.
Now, that candidate school was before you actually attended any flying or ground school, correct?
Well, we were actually, in those days, we were actually candidates the entire time we were in flight school. So when I arrived on the 5th of March, I was a warrant officer candidate until the 21st of November of 1967, when we graduated from flight school. So this candidate style, OCS style operation went on for 9 months. It wasn't just a you know, a 6-week period or whatever, and then congratulations, you're an officer, you know, go get your apartment and your Corvette, go have fun. No, this was a little different, you know. So we were challenged for quite a while. So, but I think it was an excellent way to mature guys quickly, because there wasn't going to be any time for on-the-job training when we got to Vietnam. It was going to be, it would throw you into the pile and away you'd go. You know?
Now, did you attend a ground school before you actually started flying? Or?
Yeah, the first month they called pre-flight.
Pre-flight.
And it was a period of time where you didn't do any flying. It was strictly sizing you up, finding out whether they even wanted to put you in a helicopter, and finding out whether they thought you had the mental capacity to do what they were about to demand of you. And then we left pre-flight, moved into our permanent barracks, and for the next 4 months we were in what was known as primary helicopter pilot training.
Now, how many guys had washed out of the program up to that point?
It wasn't too dramatic. Most of the guys really wanted to be there, and I would say that, you know, we lost a half a dozen out of the 200 that showed up for that. You know, the motivation is that, okay, we've got you. You know, you're in the Army, and if you leave here, you're going straight back to Fort Polk, and we're going to put you in advanced infantry training, and then, you know, 10 weeks from now, you'll be on an airplane going to Vietnam as a grunt. You know, so the guys there was a motivation factor, you know, that said, you will, I will do well here, you know, so, you know, and then the 4 months of primary helicopter pilot training was some of us flew the Hiller, the OH-23, and then the other guys flew the Schweitzer, which was the TH-55, which is now a civilian. I think it's the 269A, I think is what the civilian designation for it is. And that was just basically learning how to hover, learning how to operate in a traffic pattern, talk on the radio and fly at the same time. You know, basically just getting you prepared to move up.
Did you find it pretty tough initially to do all those things?
Oh yeah, yeah. The helicopter is not like an airplane, where in that when you're moving a control, any control you move forces you to move another control. So, for instance, in a hover, if you move the collective, this thing over here, then the pedals will have to move, and if you move the pedals, then the aircraft pitch will change, and you'll have to change the pitch. So it's a constant, and it's kind of like learning how to sit on a bowling ball. You know, it's very, very difficult. You have to be prepared to make all those movements all at one time. And at first it's huge control movements, and you're just all over the place. And then as the picture gets better in your mind, they slow down to where it's just very, very minor movements, and then to the point where at the end of that 4 months, you know, it was second nature. It was a really good feeling to have that feeling, that sensation that I can pick this thing up and I can put it exactly where I want it. You know? So the training was excellent. It was done by civilians at the time. We had what were known as Southern Airways Incorporated, were usually retired military, or maybe they were guardsmen, things of that sort, would come up and were contractors for us. And most of these guys were into their 40s. They looked like old men to us at the time. And they had thousands and thousands of hours of helicopter time, and they were demanding but excellent instructors. Yeah.
And once you graduated, you were commissioned, or did you have to go to a transition school to fly Hueys? Or?
No, we actually left Fort Walters, Texas in July of 1967, and then we went to Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Okay.
And we spent 4 months there doing the instrument flying, instrument training, and that was about 1 month, 6 weeks. I think 6 weeks of training for instrument training.
How difficult was that?
Extremely so. Helicopter really wasn't. especially the smaller aircraft, were not really ever meant to be flown on instruments, and they put an instrument panel in an old Whirlybird, an H-13, and put a big hood over it where you couldn't see outside, and you were doing all the same things, but your point of reference being the horizon when you were flying wasn't there anymore. It was just the instruments. So the instructor would basically get it off the ground for you, and then as soon as you were off the ground, he would take it and go out and be on just these instruments where you could not look outside at all. And it was extremely difficult. Vertigo was a constant battle. People were constantly getting a feeling of spinning, and there were people getting sick, things like this. But it was one of those things you just had to overcome. And I can honestly say I wasn't very good at it. I struggled to get through that part of the program. So.
And when did you say you graduated flight school?
After UE transition and then what they call tactical training, on the 21st of November, I graduated from flight school at Fort Rucker, and that's when we were given our warrants. We were warrant officer first class.
How many graduated from your initial group?
There was 200 warrant officers, about 100 officers, and we started out with about 200 warrant officers, or about 200 warrant officer candidates, and about 160 commissioned officers. We graduated a total of 300. So we lost about 60 of the 360 we started with. We graduated, I think it was 298 in my graduating class.
And at that point, everybody basically knew they were probably going to Vietnam?
Everyone got orders to Vietnam. There was no exceptions. The only exceptions were some of the guys who were sent to units that were going to Vietnam. So they might have gone to Fort Campbell, or they might have gone to Fort Hood or whatever, but they went to bases and were assigned to units that were going to be going to Vietnam within a few months anyway. So they,
So what happened to you?
I got on the airplane on the 31st of December in San Francisco, and went to Vietnam, arrived there on the 2nd of January.
Now, did you get any kind of leave to go back home first?
Oh yes, from the 21st of November till the 31st of December, I was on leave and got married during that time.
Okay, you want to tell us a little bit about that? How
Yeah,
and where you met your wife?
Yeah, my wife actually was an employee on the base at Fort Walters, and I met her on my birthday on the 8th of May of 1967. So it was my 20th birthday, and I just struck up a conversation with her. I saw her, and thought she was very attractive, and so we started dating, and I went off to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and while we were there, we kept in touch. Back in those days, the phone calls were very expensive, but I didn't care. We were on the phone. We had Labor Day weekend. We had a 3-day weekend. I actually made my way all the way from Fort Rucker, Alabama, back to Texas to spend the weekend with her, and proposed, and she said yes, and went back right after graduation. Went back to Fort Walters, and was married, and on the 2nd of December of '67, and then got on an airplane on the 31st of December and went to Vietnam.
Whereabouts did you land in Vietnam?
At Benoit. It's just north and east of Saigon. Yeah.
And were you assigned to a unit at that point, or what? Did you go through any kind of in-country?
Yeah. We all went to the 90th replacement depot, and we kind of sat around there and tried to acclimate.
No, that was in Long Binh, wasn't it?
That was in Long Binh. Yeah, they bussed us over there, and so we got there, and we sat around for about a day until we were assigned, and I got assigned to the 20th Engineer Brigade, and was basically the flight detachment for the 20th Engineer Brigade, and I spent about 4 months with them, and then was...
Now, what kind of flying were you doing with them?
Anything from flying the General to hauling food and oxygen and acetylene tanks, ammunition, parts for equipment in the field and things of that sort. You know, I have bulldozer parts.
No, you were flying a Huey?
I was flying a Huey, yeah. And then it was really kind of what we used to call ash and trash flying. You know, you never knew, you never knew exactly what you were going to be doing when you got up in the morning. You just went out. They would call you and say, "Go here, pick up this. Go pick up the general, fly him over here." You know, so on and so forth. So.
Were you ever under fire? Any of those flights?
The first 4 months, not necessarily. You got to remember that I arrived there on the 2nd of January, and on the 20th was Tet. So I was actually that night. I was in a place called Canto, which is down in the Mekong Delta, right on the river. It was one of the province capitals, and we were on the base, and then all hell broke loose at about 2 in the morning. And I gathered my crew up, and we went out to the perimeter, grabbed the M60s off the aircraft, and went out to the perimeter, and found a sergeant of the guard out there. You know, he was at the time I think he was a sergeant first class. I said, "Where do you need us?" You know, he says, "Just get up on the perimeter and start shooting that way." You know, so we put the M60s up there, and I played assistant gunner, and we shot over the perimeter, over the berm until we burned up all the barrels on the guns that we had.
Could you see what you were shooting at?
I had no idea what I was shooting at. They were putting up flares, and every once in a while a flare would go up, and I was hoping that if I stuck my head up over, they wouldn't be able to see me. There'd be enough bright light that, but I didn't want to put my head up over the perimeter too very much. There was a lot of tracer fire going on.
Okay.
So
you guys were definitely taking incoming small arms.
Small arms fire for the most part. Yeah. There was a couple of breaches of the perimeter that night. Some of the sappers got inside the wire and were taken out by the MPs that were inside. And but it was quite a night. It was and then and then the next morning we got the aircraft, and our colonel that we had was actually staying at the house of one of the Vietnamese Army colonels downtown, and he was trapped downtown. I'm glad that they didn't get him, because they would have had a lot of fun with that. But we actually went down and landed on a soccer field in the middle of downtown and got him out of there. And otherwise, he might have. Because the town was just overrun with these.
Sure.
And I don't know how we got in, got out. But we didn't take any fire. So.
Now the other pilot, was he a seasoned veteran?
No, both of us were relatively new. I think he'd been in country a month longer than I had. So I was there 20 days. He might have been there a month and a half, or maybe 2 months. Neither one of us had any real experience in country. So it was, as I said, the learning curve. It was pretty steep.
So you went back to your base?
We went back that night, and I was actually. We were actually living in Saigon at the time. There was a helipad called Hotel 3, and it was right next to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. And we were parked there, and we lived out in town in Saigon. We weren't going back there. That was off. So we packed up our things and moved to Vung Tau, which is down on the South China Sea. It was a resort town.
Yeah.
We had an old wiry Army Guard major that was running the operation, and he seemed to always land on his feet somehow, with getting us places to live and things of that sort. We always lived pretty well, so he took care of us, and we ended up living in a resort town.
Now, how many aircraft did your unit have?
We had six Hueys. We had 6 Hueys, and then we had 4 H-23G models. Yeah. And we used those for just a battalion commander need to look over his property or whatever. We could pick him up and fly him around with that, or we would run road recon in the morning from Vung Tau up to Long Ben and Van Hoa, see if there had been any activity on the road that night, mine setting, things of that sort. So that was always fun. First light in the morning, running up the road 100 feet off the ground at 50 miles an hour, you know. Always enjoyed that.
So how long did you stay at Vung Tau for?
Until May of 68. And then I was transitioned, I was sent to the 9th Infantry Division, A Company, 9th Aviation Battalion, 9th Infantry Division. And flew UEs for them in an assault helicopter company.
Okay.
And again, we did some combat assaults, not a tremendous amount, but we did some combat assaults, but mostly ash and trash flying, utility flying, you know, things of that sort, combat support. So.
Did you take any incoming rounds that damaged your aircraft?
Yeah, oh yeah. I'll preface this all by saying that one of the proudest things about my flying career in Vietnam, and in fact my entire flying career, not one person ever got hurt while they were on my aircraft. Not one person ever got shot. I didn't damage an airplane and have it roll over and hurt somebody. I operated unbelievably lucky, I think you might call it. You know, sometimes I think, yeah, I would say it's just luck. So.
And what was your living conditions like with the 9th Infantry?
Pretty sparse. We were moving from our base in Bearcat, which was not too bad, which was not too far from Long Benoit. That was a big base for 9th Infantry. We were moving the entire operation into the Delta to a town called Dong Tam, which is right outside of My To, which is another provincial capital. And the base was under construction. So basically we lived in GP medium tents with dirt floors, and our bunkers were empty 50 caliber ammunition cans full of sand that we put around our bunks. And if we got incoming, we'd roll underneath the bunk and, you know, lay in the dirt. You know. Did you
get hit with rockets or mortars very often?
Yeah, it was a pretty regular thing. You know, just it'd be random. It was more of a harassing fire than an attack, where, you know, you'd be sitting there and you'd hear one come roaring in and boom, and then that'd be it. And, you know, so just scare the living hell out of you, you know, for a couple of hours, and then you'd finally get used to it again, and then there'd be another one. You know, so you know, you just never knew when it was coming.
Any casualties or damage to the aircraft?
Yeah, they got a couple of aircraft at times, and one of my favorite stories about that is I'd been assigned to what they call the night utility for a long time. I've been getting up at 5 in the afternoon and flying all night long, getting to bed at 5 in the morning, and I'd been doing this for about a week, and I was really, really worn out, just tired, and didn't seem like I was getting any sleep at all, because you're sleeping during the day, and you know, it's hot, and it's noisy, and so I went to the ops officer and said, you know, can I get at least one day off? I just need to get some sleep at night, you know. And one guy's, the ops officer said, no, we need you to work tonight. And one guy was standing off to the side. He says, why don't you just let me fly for you tonight? He says, I've got the day off. I'll fly for you tonight, and you can take mine tomorrow. And I said, good deal. Well, that night we were all laying in our bunks, and I was finally sound asleep, and we heard the tremendous crash on the. By this time, we had moved into a tin building. We had a little tin building, and we didn't know what it was. Just a lot of noise, and I rolled off and got onto my bunk, and laid there for a little while. Well, we finally got up, got the flashlights out, and you could see a hole in the ceiling where a mortar had come through the ceiling and gone into the bunk of the guy who was out flying my trip.
Wow.
And had gone right through the, right through the mattress. And we used to put PSP down on top of the bunks, so we'd put the mattress down, put the PSP down, because you want to have a little protection above you when you were underneath it.
Yep.
And it went right through that into the concrete on the floor. And it was a dud. It was just sitting there.
Wow.
And so had that man not traded with me, that would have gone right through him.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, an 82 millimeter or 81 millimeter mortar, I guess it was. You know, the little ones about that big.
Yeah.
You know, 60. No, it was a 60. It was about that big. You know, so not an 81. So, but it never. You know, if it had gone off, it would have
Oh, jeez.
might have gotten us all.
Yeah.
So that was another one of those pieces of luck. So
Did you get an R&R at all?
yes, I did. In June of '68, I went back to Hawaii and spent a week with my wife, who by this time was already pregnant with our first child.
Oh.
And and we spent a week at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in right in Waikiki. So.
Was it difficult parting at that point?
Oh yeah, that was pretty rough. I mean, I figured I was going back for another year, or another 6 months, and so being what it was, you just don't know from day to day whether you're going to be alive in 6 months or not. So. So that makes it all that much worse. If it's 6 months and I'll see you, that's great. But if it's 6 months and I may never see you, that's another thing.
So your last 6 months, did that go by kind of slow for you, or did it go by fairly quickly?
Actually, when my son was born, he had some extreme difficulty. He was in distress, and they had to. He needed surgery right away when he was 12 hours old. So I got a Red Cross call and came home on the 20th of September of '68, and then because I was so little time left, they just said stay home, go to Fort Hood. I went there. I went to from Fort Walters. I just loaded up everything my wife and I owned at the time. We put in the back seat of a two-door car and drove to Fort Hood.
So your son was okay after that?
After that, he was fine.
Good.
Yeah, he recovered from the surgery quite well. So wore a scar. He started out, he had a scar about that big when he was born, and the scar, by the time he was an adult, the scar was that long. It looked like he'd been had quite an operation.
So you went to Fort Hood?
Yes.
And what was life like at Fort Hood?
It's great. Loved it. Was in a flying job. A lot of guys coming back from Vietnam just got shuffled off to be the motor pool officer someplace, and I ended up in a what was it? Well, it was called the airfield. I'm trying to remember. 50 C detachment of the 502nd S&T Battalion, and we were supposed to be the airfield operators. It was a supply and transport battalion, but basically it was logistics, fuel, maintaining the airport, things of that sort. And I was for the division, for the 2nd Arbor Division, I was the airfield commander.
Oh.
I was a chief warrant officer.
Yeah, I was just saying, when were you promoted to W2?
November 21st, 1968. So yeah, just one year.
Was that automatic?
I was automatic.
Okay.
Yeah, unless you had to really made a big error to not make that one. So that was just an auto. And we spent the about a year and a half there. And
Now, did you do much flying?
yeah, I was lucky enough. We had a division. Division aviation officer and I sat, in opposite offices, and we had an operations team right there, and we had, I think, 20 aircraft, 20 UEs in the division at the time, and some OH-13s and some OH-13s, not only, we had OH-23s too. We had gotten those during the time, and because I had had time in Vietnam flying the H-23 and had trained in it, they made me an IP and the instructor pilot in the 23, and I was in charge of transitioning all the guys that were never flown one before, and so I had to go out and do transition training in that, which was great because I got to fly pretty much every day. I was flying an hour or two, where most guys, weren't getting any time at all. So, where I was out getting 300 or 400 hours a year, these guys were, some guys were running the commissary or something. So, yes.
Now, did you run into anyone you were in Vietnam with during that time period?
At Fort Hood, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, one guy, Terry Ritchie, he's in Longview, Texas. Still there, I believe. And just a number of people I think a flight school classmate that I hadn't seen was there. It was a, yeah, it was a small world kind of a thing. I actually ran into some people from Ballston Spa that were in my unit. One person, I should say. Yeah, he's rather infamous around here. His name is Frank Thompson. He was the until just a couple of weeks ago was the supervisor of the town of Milton. He and I graduated high school about the same time, and he ended up in my unit at Fort Hood.
As an enlisted?
As an enlisted man, yeah. So that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I had a good time with that one. I don't know. Can I tell you the story about that?
Oh, sure,
yeah,
sure.
Okay, yeah. I had no idea he was in the unit, and when you were the junior officer in the unit, sometimes they had this thing called mid-month pay. On the 15th, you would get. We always paid in cash, and if you were the Class A agent, if you were assigned Class A agent, and you were the junior guy, you did the mid-month pay as well. So I went down to the pay place one day and got my sack, a little paper sack full of 20s, and about $20,000 worth of money, and I'm walk back, and I'm counting the money out, and I've got the book with the names of all the individuals on it. And I'm opening this one, and it says, Thompson, Frank. And I said, geez, I went to high school with a guy named Frank Thompson. Isn't that something, I fold up his money, and I set it in the stack. And so people start filing in to report for pay.
Yeah.
And here comes Frank around the corner, and he stands there in front of me, and he doesn't really even look at me. He kind of looks over the top of my head. He says, Specialist Thompson reporting for pay, sir. And I said, well, how you doing, Frank? he looks, and he just says, oh, shit. and I looked over there. I said, Specialist Thompson, that belt buckle needs a little shining. Why don't you go take care of that, and we'll talk about pay when you get done. And he said, what? And I said, and he stomps out of the office. And he came back a little while later, and he finally gets back in line. He works his way back up about a half an hour later. He comes in, he reports for pay again. And I come up over the desk, and I looked at him, and I said, those boots look like they could use a little work there, Specialist Thompson. Why don't you? And he goes, oh, come on. And I said, yeah, I know. And I said, here, how you doing? I haven't seen you. So, but that was fun. He still remembers it. I've seen him a couple of times. And we've had some talks about that. But I took care of him later on. He had one of his friends was going to be on my guard when I was the duty officer, and he told me who his friend was, so I chose him as my supernumerary that day so he could not have to stand guard that night. So I got him paid back for my harassing him that day.
All right. Where did you go after Fort Hood?
After Fort Hood, I took a commission by this time and was a first lieutenant. And,
now, what made you decide to take a commission?
I don't know. I'm thinking back on that, and I've asked that question to myself a couple of times.
Because I've always heard that warrant officer was the best rank in the Army.
And I found that out after I took a commission. I really, in many ways, regretted it that I did that because it wasn't just flying anymore. Now it was leadership, and I didn't enjoy it very much. But I was commissioned a first lieutenant in the infantry, and then from there I had to go to Fort Benning and go through infantry officer basic school. And I was not a fan of the infantry. I was a fan of the infantry from afar, but not to be part of it. It was unbelievably hard work, and I was a little too lazy for it, and so I didn't fare very well in the infantry. But from there we went from Fort Benning. I went to Korea for a year, and spent a year up on the DMZ as a helicopter pilot in an aviation unit. But went from went there as a platoon leader in just a slick unit. And I did okay. As long as I was in aviation, I was doing okay. I did pretty well, but I didn't, I don't know, I just didn't fit into the officer ranks as well. by this time, I'm only 21 or 22 years old. I'm a first lieutenant coming up on captain. I'm surrounded by officers who were West Point graduates, Citadel graduates, and things of that sort, and I'm just a guy with a high school diploma, and I probably didn't fit in with the crowd very well. So I saw that I fit in much better with the warrant officer crowd.
Now, was there any pressure on you to further your education
Yes.
with a bachelor's degree or
Yes.
associates?
Yes, I did. In fact, while I was at Fort Hood, I took night classes and started working on a college degree at Fort Hood. And much to my wife's dismay, I'd come in from work, grab dinner, right to the college campus, and spend 4 hours there on 2 nights a week, and was getting 6 hours a semester trying to get started, with my college degree, and managed to put together the first year of college in a year, just by going as much as I could, taking between 6 and 9 hours a semester while I was there.
Now, were you allowed credit for your military training?
At the time, no.
No?
Not until I came back from Korea and went to college full time, and it wasn't credit for the military training. It was credit because I went to an aviation program at a college, and they gave me credit for all my military flying experience ratings that I'd gotten from the FAA through my military training. So I was given credit for that.
Okay. And where did you go next?
Okay, after Korea, I came back and left the Army in 1971 and came back to Fort Hood, Texas, and to attend college because there was it went from it used to be a 2-year program at that college, and then they transitioned to a 4-year program, and you could get a degree in aviation management right there at Fort Hood.
So you were a civilian at that point?
By this time I came back, I was a civilian going to college on the GI Bill. And I joined the Texas National Guard in Austin, Texas. And we had a UE company, an assault helicopter company, and we had, and then the headquarters company had a bunch of OH-58s, and we flew those.
No, you were a captain.
By this time, I was a captain, right? I was assigned as the gunship platoon leader. I'd never flown a gunship in my life, but I was all of a sudden the gunship platoon leader, and I had a bunch of guys that were old warrant officers that were old gun pilots that could hold up their thumb and put rockets, through a chimney. I mean, these guys are incredible, and they, so here I'm their leader, and I'm and they're teaching me what I'm supposed to know. So it was really a lot of fun. I had more, here we are in Austin on weekends, probably one of the most fun towns in the United States for a weekend, and here I'm surrounded by a bunch of old war horses from Vietnam, some even dating back to Korea. At this point, some of these old warrant officers were Korean War vets.
Now, in the Guard at that time, were you basically on a first-name basis with the enlisted too, or?
Yeah, not officially, but anytime we were near an airplane, it was strictly, we went with equality, not necessarily, a lack of respect, but
Right.
But I think what we did was we respected individuals' abilities. And if he had a good crew chief, the last thing you wanted to do was question everything he did. So if you wanted to tell a crew chief how smart you thought he was or how good of a crew chief, you'd walk out to the aircraft in the morning and say, "Well, Chief, how does it look? Is everything okay?" And he'd say, "Yes, sir, everything's fine." I said, "That's good enough for me," and just get in and fly, no go out and do a brief. And I know that's kind of contrary to what everyone says. You're always supposed to look the airplane over,
Sure.
but I used to tell my chief that you're a good chief by doing that. And I mean, it wasn't every day. There's sometimes I'd still walk around, pre-flight, but there'd be days when I would just walk out there and give him that respect. And I think that respect is earned in that way. That when they know that you you respect their judgment and their skills, then you get respect in return. You know, so.
Now, you graduated from college. What did you get your degree in?
Aviation management.
And at that point, did you decide to go into the Navy?
Yes. June of 1974, I resigned from the Army as a captain and went through AOCS, which is Aviation Officer Candidate School at Pensacola, Florida.
Now, why did you decide on the Navy?
Well, 1974 was a time of, much like we're having right now in this country, it was a time of recession. The market was flooded with pilots of minimal experience. There wasn't a lot that I could do, and had I been single and not had a lot of responsibilities, I might have just bummed around and found a job and taken minimal pay and things of that sort to get a career going. But I didn't have time for that. I had family to take care of. So to get the experience that I needed to give me that leg up, I thought I needed to add to my credentials. So the Air Force. My first choice was the Air Force, and I went down and applied, and they said, "We'd love to have you, but since you're already a commissioned officer in another service, we won't take you unless it's an inter-service transfer, and we're not doing inter-service transfers right now." So my second choice was the Navy, and I applied and was accepted into the flight school program with the Navy.
Now, did you have any trouble transitioning from rotary wing to fixed wing?
No, I had been acquiring fixed wing ratings up to this point, so I already had a couple thousand hours of flying between helicopters and fixed wing. I'd already had 2,000 plus hours of flying, and it was really a vacation.
Now, were you flying any of the Army fixed wings like the Mohawk or the Beaver?
No, it was all civilian flying.
Okay.
I actually had a job on the weekends where I was flying a little Cessna 182 for a real estate company, and I would pick up prospective customers and fly them down to around Austin to the lakes down there. They were doing the land development thing, and they were trying to get people. So I was flying a pretty nice airplane, commercial, and made a few bucks that way, and actually got built up a lot of flight time that way. So and got a CFI, certified flight instructor's rating, and was doing a little instructing on the side, and things like that. So all the time, just attempting to build experience. So.
How did you find the Navy flight school? Was it probably easier for you than somebody just walking in cold?
Oh yeah, it really was. The first 4 months was basically a jet transition. It was I already flown fixed wing, so I knew the basics of it. I could talk on the radio and chew gum and fly at the same time, and all the easy stuff was taken care of for me. But I can honestly say that we're talking about some of the best when you go into any kind of a military flight program, and these young kids that were coming in were nipping at my heels by the time we were at the 4-month period when we went over to A4s and we were flying more tactical style flying. These guys were right there with me, and and I thought, I'll just breeze through this program. I'll be number one. I won't have any problem at all. And these guys, these old Naval Academy kids, they wanted it. They wanted to show the old man who was in charge and stuff. So, and by this time I was 27 years old. A lot of these guys were 22 years old. So I was considered the old man in the crowd, and so they wanted to prove themselves, and they did. I had to work hard to stay ahead of them.
So you received your Navy wings,
Right.
and what happened next?
After Navy flight school, I went to the Philippines for 2 years and flew Saberliners.
Whereabouts in the Philippines were you based out of?
QB Point, the Philippines, yeah. And it was one of those periods of time, it was, they were transitioning out of the wartime Navy, and the Navy was shrinking, and the budget was going down, and they were closing squadrons of fighters and attack aircraft down. So, but no one told the flight school to stop putting people through flight school. So they were pumping pilots through, and then a lot of guys were just getting assigned to ground jobs. They were getting supply officer jobs and things of this sort when they finished flight school, and just it was really a pretty bad time. And I graduated very high in my graduating class for that that week, but there was virtually no place for us to go, and I ended up getting lucky enough to continue flying by going to, but I had to go to the Philippines to do it. And we packed up the entire family. By this time I had two kids, and we went to the Philippines and lived for 2 years while I flew around there.
What was life like there?
It was pretty good. You know, very inexpensive. We had base housing on Subic Bay. It was the tropics. We were 10 degrees north of the equator, so it was warm. And we basically, they carved out of a jungle a place for us to live. They just cleared the trees back, and we had a house. And but we had a full-time maid, and I had a gardener that did all my lawn mowing for me, and my wife had a seamstress that would come in and make curtains and clothes and all this kind of stuff. So, and all of these things cost. The maid was a full-time maid was $25 a month. A gardener was $5 a month for 4 days a week, or 4 weeks.
Now, what rank did you hold at that point?
I was a JG. I was equivalent to a first lieutenant, Lieutenant JG, and then I stayed that until I came back to the States. So.
Now, tell me about some of the missions you flew out of the Philippines.
It was mostly flying the Admiral, and it was pretty interesting. We flew from Cuba up to near Tokyo, a little base called Atsugi, Japan, and we would fly the Admiral. We would fly high priority, non-flag officers, getting ready for major exercises, things of that sort. So it was, I don't know, and then just occasionally we would just really not, I really can't say that we had a particularly difficult mission or a particularly important mission, but we filled the bill. When someone needed to move, a small number of people, a lot of times it was a crowd of enlisted guys that they needed them someplace. We would put 6 guys in the back of the aircraft and take them.
Now, you mentioned flying to places like Singapore.
Yep.
Same type of mission, bringing an admiral there? Or?
Right. Yep. Usually, these moving flag officers was our major mission, and was usually one of the sink pack, not sink pack very much, but I'm trying to remember the air wing, not the air wing, you got me. I'm trying to think of the title for these guys. Task force commanders. They were admirals in charge of a task force of ships. It might be a Marine general with a division commander, things of that sort. That we would move to places. And I think a lot of cases when we took them to Hong Kong or we took them to Taipei, it was they had 15 minutes of work and 2 days of shopping. So.
After you left the Philippines, where did they send you next?
Norfolk, Virginia. And
that must have been a letdown.
actually, it was some really great flying there, though. I flew a lot, and flying a Sabreliner again, and I had a couple of trips to Europe from there in the Sabreliner, which was an ordeal because it didn't have the range to do anything nonstop. We had to hop across the Atlantic. We'd go up to St. John's, Newfoundland, then Keflavik, then maybe Shannon, Ireland, you know, something like that. We would make 800-mile hops just to get across the Atlantic. And coming back was always treacherous because the winds were always higher. The winds are easterly flow, so when you're coming westbound, sometimes the winds get up over 100 knots, and and we didn't have the fancy navigation equipment that is out there today, and we were basically dead reckoning in a lot of cases, you know, flying our way across the Atlantic, you know, so. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have. I didn't have Warrant or any of this stuff. It was, you'd run out to the end of a VOR, then you'd wait for the other one to come in. You know, you'd have an ADF on, and you know how reliable ADF is. It'd be just barely a needle would be dancing around. We wouldn't know exactly where we were. You know, so you just kind of pray for the best.
And so you were in Norfolk for how long?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then left the Navy. Got out of the Navy. And
Now, how many years did you have at that point?
altogether, I put 6 years in the Navy.
Okay. And your time in the Army?
Was 5 years.
Okay, so you had 11 years.
Had 11 years, yeah,
All right.
of active duty.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, and by this time, I also had 2.5 years in the Guard. So you can see my situation. I'd gotten how many? You know, almost 14 years of time. So I had to finish up. You know, you get to this point, you've got to do it.
Sure.
You know, so I went into a CAV unit at Picatinny Arsenal down in New Jersey, and one of my flight school, basic training and flight school friends ran that unit, and he ended up being the state aviation officer for New Jersey. He made general. We were all warrant officers together, and he makes general. I don't know what happened to me.
Now, when you left the Navy, you went back into the
Back into the Army.
Back into the Army. What rank did you?
I went back in as a captain.
As a captain, okay.
Right. Yeah, I have more time and grade as a captain than anybody I know. It just seemed like every place I went, you know, it was okay. We'll just make you a captain, and somehow it would always start out with 0 time and grade. You know.
Oh yeah.
So then I'd get 4 or 5 years, and you know then I'd start someplace else and get another 3 or 4 years. So I had like 10 years as a captain in the Army, you know, or altogether 10 years as an 03. And when I finally got to the point where I had enough time at one place to go before the majors board, the board got my paperwork and said, "What is this?" You know, they looked at it and they said, "You've got 10 years, 11 years as captain." And I said, "Yeah, well, that's the way it is," you know. And they wrote me a letter to ask me what this all about, and I kind of explained it all to them. Well, when they promoted me to major, they said, "Not only are you a major, you're a major with 4 years time and grade. We're going to backdate your time and grade back to here." Yeah, and I said, "Well, that was great, but there's only one problem with that is, I don't know, people that are in the military understand that there's the education requirements for different ranks, and I had not taken the time to do all what they call in the Army Command and General Staff College. I hadn't done all the C and GS stuff, so I'd gone through the advanced course. I'd taken 2 advanced courses. Took the infantry advanced course, took the aviation advanced course. But now all of a sudden I needed Command and General Staff College to make lieutenant colonel. I had 1 year to do it. Well, you're not going to do it. You know, I mean, unless they put you in residence at Fort Leonard Wood, you're not going to make it. So I just I realized that was the end of it for me, and so at about 22 years of time in the military, well, I got passed over for lieutenant colonel, and because of education, lack of education, and I just said that's it. And and at that point in time, if you weren't a lieutenant colonel, then you had to go. You know.
Now, at that point, how many thousand hours of flying time did you have?
I had in the military. I had over 5,000
Wow.
flying hours in the military, and then But then I got out into the civilian world and started flying and various jobs, and ended up with Southwest Airlines in 1990, and flew the Boeing 737. And I thank the military every day for putting me through flight schools to get me to the point where I could have gotten that job, because it was one of those things where you look forward to going to work.
Yeah.
You know, I loved every minute of it. And I was flying 900 hours a year. So when my career finally ended, I had over 25,000 flying hours, with most of it in jets, very little of it in helicopters, even though that's where I started.
Yeah.
I had about 2,000 hours of helicopter time, and altogether about 23,000 of fixed wing time.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
Now, when did you retire?
The 8th of May of 2007. Actually, the 7th of May was my last flying day, because if you turned 60 back in those days, you could no longer fly.
I see.
And so the actual last legal day I could fly was the 7th of May. So I made sure I flew on that day, and retired from. Actually, flew my last trip into Albany County Airport, Albany International Airport, and had my retirement party right there with my friends from the station at Southwest Airlines.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
So what have you been doing with yourself since then?
I took a job for a little while over at the local airport here, flying charter, but it just after Southwest, it just wasn't what I wanted. So we did that about a year, and then just called it quits. And I've been trying to stay somewhat active in helping younger people that want to get into the aviation business, guiding them a little, that adding the wisdom that I've acquired over the years to their lexicon, and hoping that they can learn from me and not make some of the same mistakes I did along the way. And, so it's been good. I've got a college kid that I take good care of, making sure that he's on the straight and narrow, and I'm very proud of him. He's doing very well down at Embry-Riddle University, and then I try to do a couple of career days every year for the schools around the area, and tell kids about a career in aviation, things of that sort. So.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Actually, no. I'm somewhat of a private guy. The only organization, I guess I should say that, yes, I had joined one. It was the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association.
Okay.
And the VHPA, as we call it. And it's basically just a way for us to all kind of keep in touch and relive our glory days every once in a while. So I don't participate very much, but I like getting the newsletters and reading the stories about some of the guys that were, that really had tough tours. Mine was pretty easy.
Have you attended any of their reunions at all?
Yes, I have. I attended the one at Fort Worth, Texas. And I keep telling myself every year that I'm going to go to another one, and I keep not going. It's a long story. I have a family reunion every year that I host at my house, and there's usually 100+ people, and it always falls about the same time as those conventions that we have. So I have the dilemma of deciding how much effort can I put into my family reunion, and then be able to pack up and go right away. And in a lot of cases, there's people that travel in from all over the country to come to this thing, including my daughter, and I can't just say, well, you're at my house, I'll see you in a week, I'm going to go hang out with my old buddies. So I just end up not going.
Now, have you stayed in touch with any of the guys you knew in the military?
Yeah, some of the guys. One of the people I met in the Navy was from East Greenbush, and we ended up out in the Philippines together.
Oh.
And we didn't know each other, never met each other until we got to the Philippines. And that we met in 1976, and I probably talked to Vince on the phone 3 times a week. I'm usually down there at least once a week. He's up here at least once a week. We just hang out together. I've been to all 3 of his weddings and all 3 of his divorces.
All right.
So he's a great guy. You know, I love him like a brother. You know, so. You know, I got one other great story I got to tell you before we turn this thing off. I went through flight school with a guy named Steve Collins, Army flight school. We went all the way through Army helicopter pilot training together, and we saw each other in Vietnam once or twice. Kind of lost track of each other, and so in 1974 I went into the Navy, and after about a week I had a little more freedom. I could walk around a little bit more, and I was walking by a group of guys, and I heard this voice in the background going, "Rick, Rick." I went, "Where's that coming from?" I looked around, and it was Steve Collins standing in the formation. He was going through Navy flight school a week after me. We had gone through Army flight school together, and now he was standing in the formation. So we met.
Let me just stop you here. I have to change tapes.
Okay.
You were saying you heard your name being called.
Right. So I heard my name being called, and I heard. I looked over, and there's Steve Collins, the guy that I'd gone through Army flight school with, is now a week behind me in Navy flight school. And so we renewed our friendship, and we kept in touch throughout our time in the Navy, and then I got out of the Navy and kind of lost track of him again. Well, the next time I saw anything of Steve Collins, I was watching the movie Top Gun, and I was watching the credits, and he was the EXO, the executive officer of the Top Gun school in the Navy when they made the movie, and he was in the credits right under Duke Cunningham, who was now in jail. You know, so Duke Cunningham was the commanding officer of the unit at the time. So and then another one of those really strange things. You know, I don't really know exactly where he is. I just know he's out there somewhere, and I'm at Southwest Airlines getting ready to take off out of San Diego to fly to Sacramento, and Steve Collins walks in, wants a ride on my jump seat. He's working for Federal Express as a captain for Federal Express, and he wants to get a ride up to Sacramento to start his trip. So you know, I mean, so the world is so small in aviation, and that we will tend to have that happen to us. We'll run into people that we've known over the years, and Steve is just a prime example of that. You know, I've got his phone number on my phone. About once a year, I'll pick it up. Where are you now? You know. So.
All right. Now you have 2 children.
I have one now. My son passed away about 20 years ago. Yeah.
And do you have any grandchildren?
My daughter has 3 children. Yeah, she lives in Texas with her husband, who is a retired Marine Corps Master Gunnery Sergeant, and great guy. My hero. And I have 3 granddaughters. One's 21, one's 14, one's 8, and all the love of my life. Yeah, so.
You probably, well, I think you probably touched on this, but how do you think overall your time in the service changed or affected your life?
I'll put it this way. Had it not been for the military, I probably would have been working out here in a garage someplace. You know, I was kind of a car nut back in those days. I probably would have just stayed into that atmosphere and just worked on vehicles and kind of been a mechanic or whatever. But I think it was the military broke the cycle and got me away from Ballston Spa. And not necessarily that Ballston Spa is a bad place, so I'm not trying to say that, but it just got me away from the environment that I was in and the environment that I placed myself in. Changed that so that when I came back, I was really a different person. And I thank the military for that every day. You know, I was not always in love with the military, but I'm smart enough to know that the military gave me what I've got.
And you started out in Ballston Spa, and you're back here again.
I'm living on the same piece of property that I grew up on.
Oh,
And
very nice.
yeah, my grandparents had a farm on Old Post Road,
Mhm.
and I grew up on that farm. And we had 160 acres at one point. It's down to 8 acres, and that's the 8 acres I live on.
Mhm.
And I hope I'm making them proud.
I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for your interview.
Thank you.
You do have a photograph, and you want to tell us when and where that was taken?
Yeah, I was young stud Army captain flying helicopters in Korea, and I think by the cock of the hat and the mustache and the length of the hair, you could see I had a little attitude problem there. So I think I was 23 years old in that picture. And so,
Were there any other stories that or anything we missed that you'd like to go over?
no, I don't tell war stories.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Wayne.